Yo, this is a motherfucker who needs no introduction. You are watching Breaking Wreckords Radio.
All right, you are now tuned in to Breaking Wreckords Radio. My name is Alex, and I have here with me one of my absolute favorite MCs. From his work with Greenhouse Effect alongside Blueprint, to doing back-to-back albums with the legendary Blockhead, to self-producing his own work on his latest project titled Autopilot, out now. Please welcome Ohio's own Illogic. What's good, my man?
What's up, man? Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, man, I appreciate you kind of taking the time out to speak to me here today. I appreciate it, and I can't look forward enough to this conversation.
Cool. Let's do it. I'm ready to get in.
Yeah, I want to begin by talking about some of your history. So last time we ended up speaking, we went over some of the late 90s, kind of early 2000s history, meeting LP, and A$AP Rock, and kind of, meeting them for your first time, your verse on Labor Days, and I wanted to kind of rewind a little bit and talk about your history with Blueprint in the mid-90s and Greenhouse Effect. I recently ended up losing one of the bids on the Greenhouse Effect demo that popped up recently on eBay, and it kind of really made me start thinking about this kind of old history in Ohio, and I wanted to dive into this. How did you and I guess the rest of the Greenhouse Effect cats end up getting together? Because I know there was more than just yourself and Blueprint at that period of time.
Yes. Well, there was Manifest and Inkwell, who actually went to school with Blueprint. And well, the way that I got involved was Manifest actually went to the same high school that I did, but he went years ago. He had since graduated. And I was in high school, I would organize battles and that we would have during our lunch breaks. And this one particular day, we had Alumni Day, which, a lot of the people that had graduated would come back and, meet the teachers, talk to the students, things like that. And so we had this Alumni Day, and I had planned a big battle. Like, we used to do brackets and all kind of things. And it was always a major event, whenever we threw a battle at school. So I planned it for this Alumni Day because the school would be packed with people. And, it was one of those kind of chill, laid back days at high school. And so we had the battle during lunchtime, and it just so happened that Manifest was there, and he saw the battle, and he saw me battling. And I had a crew at the time called Unconquered Dimension. That was me, a friend of mine named Charles, and a female. She went by Lady Virtuoso. And so we battled. We had to battle. I ended up winning the battle. And after I finished, Manifest had talked to me, introduced himself and told me that he wanted to see if I wanted to come down to their college to perform at the show. And I went, me and my crew, we actually went down there and performed. And that's when I met Blueprint for the first time. And, and then fast forward a little bit to me graduating high school, I went to the University of Cincinnati for college. And that was the same place that Dose One, Yoni from Y, J. Rawls went there as well. Dibs lived in Cincinnati. Location of the infamous Scribble Jam years. And it just so happens that Blueprint lived in Cincinnati at the time and for work, because he was working as a computer programmer for a large company here. And, we had stayed in touch after that performance. And once I let him know that I was in Cincinnati and I was going to school there, we hooked up. And from then on, that first year of college is when I recorded Unforeseen Shadows, and the rest is kind of history.
Was moving to Cincinnati the reason why, I guess, Unconquered Dimension ended up splitting up?
Not necessarily. I was more serious than the rest of the crew was, and it wasn't any, any bad blood or, me and my friend Charles are, my friend Charles are actually still friends to this day. There wasn't any bad blood. It was just, I went off to college and everyone else kind of did their own thing. I think Lady Virtuoso, she ended up going to college in DC. So, we all just kind of went our own separate ways after high school, but it wasn't any bad blood.
Fair enough. In what year are we kind of talking about? Is this like the mid 90s? Or you mentioned some names like Dose 1 and whatnot. Would that have been like 95, 96, like early kind of pre-Anticon days?
No, it was like 98.
98, okay.
So it was like right when Anacon was starting to form. Because Dose was still doing music with Gel. He started doing the Them stuff at that time with Gel, and the Cloud Dead stuff is what he and Yoni were doing at that time. And I had the pleasure of being on Cloud Dead, the Green Think album, I believe. And yeah, that was 98 when I went to college.
Gotcha. The demos that were floating around then, so I kind of imagine them to be mid 90s, but I guess they would have had to have been late 90s at that period of time. I don't know if you're familiar with the demo tape that ended up populating, but it was essentially just a Greenhouse Effect demo. It had a phone number on it, and it was it came from basically a lot of tapes that a DJ in Philadelphia ended up having, but it looked fairly official, and the area code on the phone number ended up linking back to Cincinnati. So I assume that it was legitimate anyway. For that demo tape, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, it was actually a demo tape. I remember me and Blueprint had a conversation because he saw that it had popped up, and it was his old phone number. That from Cincinnati, so it was definitely legit.
That demo, would that have been the same basically material that would have ended up coming on to the up to speed EP that ended up coming out, I guess probably the following year then in 99 or 2000 that EP ended up dropping?
That EP ended up dropping in 99. We dropped that EP and Unforeseen Shadows the same year on tape. And I honestly, we weren't sure exactly what was on that demo. I'm sure it, probably was because Greenhouse was actually formed before I came into the picture to, start recording as part of Weightless. I did do the song Weightless with them, and that's where the name derived from, us doing that song together. And but they had a lot of material even before I came into the picture. So who knows what's on that demo tape?
Fair enough. At some point, the crew ends up just basically becoming yourself and Blueprint. Can you explain, I guess, the transition from Inkwell and Manifest being a part of the group to just being you two?
Well, Inkwell had ended up leaving the group, leaving Weightless altogether because he was pursuing Christian rap at the time. He had ended up, turning his life over to Christ and started doing Christian rap with some friends of his that he knew from church. So, him leaving, that wasn't a big deal. There was no bad blood there. And so, we kind of, let him go on his way. Now with Manifest, there's a completely different story. That man ended up stealing money from the company. He like basically kind of wiped us out. And because after Inkwell left, Greenhouse was just Blueprint and Manifest. They did the Columbus or Bust album, and it was just them two. And, after that album came out, things were cool. And that's around the same time that the first Soul Position stuff started dropping. And Manifest ended up being Blueprint's road manager and tour manager for a lot of those tours. And I guess, he wanted, more limelight, and wasn't, thinking, I don't know exactly what happened, but yeah, he ended up stealing a lot of money from us and almost wiping us out. And during that time, me and Blueprint and all of them actually fell out because, during that time, because normally I was getting paid regularly every 3 months, every quarter, for my royalties. And there went almost a year where I wasn't getting paid anymore. And every time I would talk to Manifest, because he handled all of the business stuff while Blueprint was out on the road with Soul Position, and he was just telling me, like, the money's not coming in, albums aren't selling. Meanwhile, I'm, getting all of these accolades, and all these people have my record, and I'm like, why am I not getting paid? So we all kind of fell out in this, and not knowing during this time, and Blueprint didn't know either. Because I never actually spoke to him when we actually fell out. And come to find out after a while, Blueprint called me over to his house one night, and we hadn't talked in over a year. And he called me over to his house one night and said, he wanted to patch things up and he wanted to talk to me. And I went over there and he showed me all the books, and he was like, Jermaine has been stealing from us, for the last 2 years. And, there was thousands of dollars that he had stolen. And so that was the reason I wasn't getting paid, and Blueprint had no idea. So, and that man disappeared. We haven't seen him since that happened. And so that's how he was no longer part of Greenhouse. And at first, Blueprint was going to just disband Greenhouse and not even continue with the name. But one day he called me up and it was like, yo, you want to be part of, you want to start Greenhouse with me, just me and you, we be Greenhouse. And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so he started sending me beats, and that's when we recorded the first 2 Electric Purgatory EPs.
Man, that's brutal. That's a hard betrayal to swallow, right? Like, you said it yourself, Manifest was the one that introduced you to everyone.
Exactly. Like him and Blueprint, they grew up together. They lived in the same neighborhood. Like, they had been childhood friends. So, for someone who you consider, almost a brother to you, to do that, was really, really hard for all of us.
Yeah. Like, how does somebody do that to friends for a few $1,000s, right? Like, obviously the money to you was meaningful. It meant something, right? It was substantial. It was your livelihood, but at the same time, like, that's not enough in order to fuck up friendships.
Yeah, it wasn't worth it, like with what he did take. Yeah, it wasn't worth it at all. So, but we haven't talked to him since, and haven't seen him. I'm not even sure if he still lives in Columbus. I don't know.
So I want to talk about the new album as well. So the new album, for everyone listening at home, it's out now. It's called Autopilot, and it's entirely produced by yourself. And I don't know. I think there was more to just producing and wrapping the album as well, right? You did the photography, and it was really kind of a completionist project from beginning to end by you. And that's different from your previous projects, right? So you've worked with Blockhead in the past. You've obviously worked with Blueprint. You generally end up doing kind of collaborative projects, and this is not that. Why do you feel the need, I guess, at this stage of your art, to kind of take ownership of these new avenues?
Well, I've always been the type of artist who feels like if I'm not growing and expanding on my art, then I'm doing myself and my fans a disservice. So, taking it all the way back to when I recorded Celestial Clockwork, I had always told myself that, one day I'm going to, produce an album for myself. And I held on to that, notion of wanting to do that. And, fast forward to probably about 6 years ago, I was out on tour with DJ Bombay, who actually does some cuts on the album as well. But I was out on tour with him. He was my tour DJ, and after a show, we had gone back to our hotel room, and this man pulls out his entire computer out of his duffel bag and sets it up on the table in the hotel.
Like a desktop computer?
Yes. I mean, well, it was one of those, kind of Apple Minis.
Oh, okay,
but
gotcha.
It was an Apple Mini, but he had a 27-inch monitor or 29-inch monitor or something. So it was this huge TV basically sitting on our on our table. And so he pulls it out and hooks it up and puts his headphones on, and starts clicking buttons and stuff. And I, go up to the side of him like, what are you doing over there? And he's like, yo, I'm making beats. So I pulled up a chair and I was like, show me how to do it. And, I made my first beat that night in that hotel room on Ableton. And it was whack. But I, saw that it was possible to do it because, I had always wanted to produce, but learning how to use the MPC and learning how to use, the EPS and, all these other, tools that I saw everybody else using looked like, it was just too difficult to learn. So I never, I was kind of scared of diving into that end of the pool. But I work with computers for a living now. I'm a systems analyst and financial analyst. I do a lot of analytics. But so I saw that, it was a little easier and, it seemed like a computer program I can learn, So I got bit by the bug that night in that hotel room and went home and started to, tinker with my equipment that I had. I had Cubase at the time, which wasn't a good DAW for, making beats, at least for me. And I transitioned to FL Studio, which is, Fruity Loops, which is what I use to this day. And, I've always loved production. I've always been a fan of that part of hip hop. Just growing up, the beats were always something amazing. And as a jazz person, like I played the saxophone in middle school as well. So I, was always into jazz and hearing the jazz loops that was, encompassed in hip hop, always intrigued me. And, so I got bit by the bug that night in that hotel room and I haven't stopped since.
You mentioned at the beginning there that kind of drive or that need in order to continue to innovate, I guess, but to continue to push forward and do something new. Do you feel that rapping after 20 odd years was just becoming kind of stale? Like there was a halt in that innovation process, do you think, or?
No, not necessarily. It was just like rapping for 20 years. It's like, if you're a mechanic for 20, 30 years. Like after a while, you can do things with your eyes closed. You know what I mean? Like after a while, like me, I can sit down at any moment in time. I don't have to be in the mood. I don't have to have inspiration hit me. I can sit down at any moment in my life and write a 16-bar verse that will most likely be pretty good, if not very good. So I can do that, like that's, like the muscle memory is there, it's a part of me now. So it wasn't as much of a challenge as it used to be. It's always still fun. I still enjoy it. And now what I'm doing is, just trying different things with my voice and different things with my rhyme style, especially using my own production. But, I just wanted to expand and grow. So I, picked up the camera, started, doing photography, started doing some videography. And, I spent hours and hours of study, for about the first 3 years of me making beats. That's all that I did. I would go in my basement, like I made myself a schedule. I would go into my basement and, for those 3 hours of night, 3 or 4 hours a night, I would, study. I would watch tutorials. I would try things. I would, listen to records and, find loops from people that have already, loops from famous songs and see how they chopped them up and see how they used them, how they manipulated them. And for like a good 2 to 3 year period, that's all that I did. Because I wanted to, if I was going to do it, I wasn't going to do it half-assed. I was going to go all the way in and make sure that when I get to a point where I do have projects that are produced by myself, even if it's for me or for someone else, that the production was top notch. So, I really put that time in to learn. And it was just a new challenge for me, something new.
Yeah, that's a beautiful feeling. Like, I think when it comes to learning any new skill or, I guess, diving into a new topic and researching and learning something, it always comes in this I don't know, there's like this graph or chart that you kind of follow, in this process that you follow when you're starting to learn something. And at start, everything is daunting and uncomfortable, but you're excited to learn it, so you're going to push yourself through. And then eventually you start kind of learning the ins and outs. You start learning the language of it, and everything starts to stick, right? And that is the funnest, like, most enjoyable, almost human experience that at least myself personally I can have, is once I start to learn the language enough that things stick, and then it's just this like whole like new world opens up to you, about the kind of endless possibilities, right? It's a beautiful feeling. You're very conscious on this album for, I guess, not being a perfect album, and you're conscious of that fact. I guess the imperfections almost show, I guess, a sense of humanity behind the art. Was that something that was intentional during the creation process of this album, or is it something that you kind of reflected on later after acknowledging how the project ended up coming out?
Well, it was. I was definitely cognizant of the fact that it wasn't going to be perfect, mainly because a lot of these beats are beats that I made in those first 2 or 3 years that I started producing. So it was a lot of experimentation. It was a lot of kind of learning how to use the equipment, kind of learning how to, manipulate sound, finding sounds. I would take my field recorder out and record things and come home and chop them up, and like just trying a whole bunch of different things, as well as trying different things lyrically. I was definitely aware. I was definitely aware of, it not being perfect. Hello?
Yeah, I'm still here. I can hear you.
Can you hear me still?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I was definitely aware of it not being perfect because in reality, I was still learning at the time. So, it wasn't going to be perfect. I wasn't a seasoned producer. I hadn't been making beats for 20 or 30 years, so I was cool with it being not, the perfect sounding album. But, I think that adds to the beauty of the album as well, that it's not completely technically sound, but, that adds to the character of it.
Yeah, I love the album. I think my favorite song, actually definitely my favorite song off the album, is The Depth, or Keep It Moving, which closes off the album. And I love that song. It speaks on, I guess, the racial divides in the world right now, but it does so in a way that remains hopeful. And I think it offers solutions rather than simply listing the problems. You get this rather kind of beautiful message to the black man in America, but it's ultimately a song about dichotomies, right? It's a song about hopelessness, but it's also a song about hope. It's a song about individualism, but it's also about teamwork. It's this song about racial divides, but it's about unity. It's about history, but it's about the present. It's about status quo, but it's also about revolution. I think ultimately the song speaks on the concept of, I guess, balance and the struggle to aim ourselves towards progress. Can you detail where your head was at with this song? Because not only do I think it's a beautiful song, but I think it's arguably one of the best songs of your career.
Oh, I appreciate that. It's funny because, like I said, like this album, I recorded all of these songs probably maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and to see where we are now, as far as the racial tensions in this country, it's it's kind of sad, that I can write something 3 or 4 years ago that is still relevant today. And it's the same way with, NWA's Fuck the Police. It's the same way with a lot of, older songs that, from the 70s, even we can go back from the, 60s, even Strange Fruit, from Nina Simone is still relevant to this day in some way. And, it's something about that struggle that, us as African Americans have had in this country since we've been brought here, that unfortunately kind of still has to be talked about. It has to be addressed. But, there's also in this song talks about responsibility as, a person, and not always blaming your surroundings on the reason why you are in a position that you are in. Because a lot of the things that, As much as there is systematic, issues that are bound, that are around, we still have opportunities. We still have a chance to make something of ourselves and be who we want to be. And, that's something that's always been instilled in me since I was young. My mother would always, because Black history wasn't taught in school to a degree that she thought was enough, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was in sixth grade. I was always being taught about my history as an African American and our history, and not using that as an excuse, kind of using that as fuel to fuel me forward and continue to press on. And, I think this song is really about the depth of humanity, and not just African American humanity, but just humanity itself, that there's, not an excuse to be mediocre. Even though you go through things, even though life is hard, you can still achieve and you can still grow and, be successful.
Yeah, I think that responsibility is really key in the song, and it's that taking action that ends up making the song rather hopeful rather than just depressing, right? When you say, what do you say? You say, let's make sure our seeds span out and realize that our culture is what we need to start a revolution, seek solutions found in the creases of unity, embrace the challenges, and see the problems as opportunities, right? These are it's a plan to move forward. It's not just kind of glooming on the horribleness of our times.
Right, exactly. And I definitely wanted to, be kind of a beacon in that way, to, that we don't, everything isn't perfect, of course, but, we can become successful, and we can get out of, the ruts that, sometimes we feel like society has put us in. But in reality, there's a lot more control that we have over our trajectory than, we realize sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Why was this message important to you to kind of leave the album off with? Because it's the closing track off the album.
Yeah, because, there are I do talk about some other things throughout the album that, that are a little darker, and, a little more angst, a little more worry, a little more frantic throughout the album. But I wanted to leave the album on a positive note, and I wanted to, make sure that at the end of the record that the listener, felt up. You know what I mean? Because it's also probably the most positive energy in the production as well on the record. It feels kind of like a sunny day, in that song, as far as the production as well. So I wanted to kind of leave the listener with something to chew on, and, almost a smile on their face, that things are possible, and that, we can continue to grow, and things aren't always as bad as they seem.
You mentioned writing this album a couple years ago, so this would have been, I guess, pre-COVID at the very least. Obviously, when you put the album out, considering it just came out maybe last week that the album ended up dropping, October 19th, something like that?
It was the 20th, yep, on
20th.
Tuesday.
Gotcha. By the way, I like that you're sticking to the Tuesday release schedule rather than Friday. I'm so used to Tuesdays still being my album release day, but it's slowly shifted forward because of Spotify, so thank you.
Yep, I did that on purpose. That was purposefully done.
Yeah, so this was obviously recorded in a pre-COVID world, but when you released it, you would have ended up knowing that you're releasing it under these circumstances. Was there a conversation with yourself ever to postpone this until afterwards so that there could be touring opportunities, that kind of thing? And are you still trying to end up planning anything like that for when this kind of settles down a little bit, or are you able to tour locally within your area? I'm not sure what the restrictions are like in Columbus.
Well, initially, it's interesting because with this being my first self-produced album, I was honestly, freaked out about releasing it. I was confident in it. I had sent it to a lot of my friends, my close friends, Blueprint, Ill Poetic. and all of them were telling me how good the record was. So I had initially planned to release it in the fall of last year, and I had some family things come up, so I shifted it to spring, and then COVID hit. So, once COVID hit, I was kind of in limbo, and I remember having a talk with Blueprint, and he was like, you aren't, because I'm really not a touring artist as much anymore, because of family, and I have a full-time job, and it's a little more difficult to get, big the time off of that right now. And, I'm 40 years old. Like, I'm, sleeping in hotel rooms every night. It's not really, my cup of tea anymore. But I love, I did plan on doing like a few release parties. So I was planning on doing, a couple things in, some bigger cities, maybe Chicago, going to San Fran, New York. I was planning on doing that, but, Blueprint told me, like, you're not really planning on touring anyway, so what are you waiting for? And, the light bulb went off, like, yeah, what am I waiting for? So last year on our podcast, we, Super Duty Tough Work, we did, at the end of the year, we did a 90 Days of Discipline challenge. And part of that challenge for me was to get my artwork ready and, to get, start getting prepared to release my record. And again, spring was the plan, but then COVID hit. So what I ended up doing was creating a live streaming event that I do every Friday, a live stream show called Beats and B-Sides, that I do every Friday. And I'm still going to be doing it. But, it was my way, instead of touring, to connect with my fans that way and be able to connect with all of them all over the world at once. And so I started doing that in preparation for the release and building, I've been campaigning for this album basically for a whole year, and, started doing that regularly and building anticipation for the album. And, I will maybe do some shows still, once, all the restrictions are lifted and all of that. But I wasn't really planning on touring anyway, so, it's not really going to affect me that much.
Fair enough. Man, I said it at the beginning of the call here, but I can't thank you enough for taking the time out to speak to me here today. I appreciate it, and I will end up letting you go. That being said, again, thank you, and I love the album. For anyone listening at home, again, go check out the album. It's available on Bandcamp. It's out on vinyl. It's out on CD. It's called Autopilot. I'll leave links in the description as well if you're watching this later on YouTube. But yeah, definitely go out and check out the project. And again, thank you so much, man, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it. And anytime.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'd love to kind of talk again whenever you do end up having another project down the road that's coming out.
Okay.
All right, sounds good.
All right, well, you have a great rest of your day, man.
You as well. Peace.
Peace.